There are confessions so terrible that even God himself would turn away from them. And yet, some priests are cursed to write them down. I am Father Graves, guardian of forbidden truths that haunt the corridors of power. Tonight, I will unveil the chronicle of Father Alessandro Toretti, a man who stared into the abyss and returned with testimony that the Church buried beneath centuries of silence. His manuscript, written in his own trembling hand, was sealed away in the deepest vaults of the Vatican archives. But I have broken those seals, and what I discovered will make you question everything you believe about divine protection. This is the account of a priest who encountered pure evil and survived to document it. But as you'll soon learn, sometimes the most terrifying monsters wear the faces we trust most. Sometimes the devil doesn't need to possess anyone, because he's already inside the very institution meant to fight him. Subscribe now to witness every dark mystery I dare to unveil from the Vatican's forbidden depths. It was the bitter winter of 1887 when Father Alessandro Toretti first set foot in the cursed village of Castel di Sang, the Castle of Blood. A name that should have been warning enough, but the Church, in its infinite arrogance, believed that faith could conquer any darkness. Toretti was young then, barely 35, with eyes still bright with conviction and a heart untouched by the corruption that festers in the shadows of holy orders. The Vatican had sent him to investigate reports of a demonic possession. A 12-year-old girl named Lucia who spoke in ancient tongues and levitated above her bed during the darkest hours of the night. What they didn't tell him was that Castel di Sang had been the site of 7 previous exorcisms. 7 priests had come before him, and 7 priests had never returned to Rome. Toretti's first letter to Cardinal Antonelli arrived 3 days after his arrival. I have it here before me now, written in his careful, optimistic script. Your Eminence, I have arrived safely in Castel di Sang. The villagers speak in hushed tones of the Benedetti girl, but I sense more superstition than true evil. I am confident that with prayer and proper ritual, we shall have her cleansed within the week. The local priest, Father Marcello, has been most accommodating, though he seems troubled by something he will not speak of. How naive he was. How beautifully, tragically naive. The Benedetti house stood at the village's edge, a stone structure that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. When Toretti first entered, he found little Lucia chained to her bed, not by her family's cruelty but by necessity. The marks on her wrists told a story of desperate restraint. But it wasn't the child that first disturbed him. It was her father, Giuseppe Benedetti, who watched from the corner with eyes that held no hope. And it was Father Marcello, the local priest, whose hands shook as he blessed the holy water. Father, Toretti wrote in his second letter, there is something wrong with this place that goes beyond the girl's affliction. The villagers will not meet my eyes. Father Marcello speaks in riddles about the bargain and the price that must be paid. When I press him for clarity, he only crosses himself and mutters about contracts written in blood. That second letter was dated December 10, 1887. It was the last communication the Vatican received from Father Toretti for 6 weeks. What happened during those 6 weeks was documented in Toretti's private journal, a journal that the Church thought was destroyed, but which I discovered hidden behind a false wall in the Vatican's secret archives. The pages are stained with what forensic analysis would later confirm was human blood, though whose blood remained a mystery. The journal begins normally enough. Daily prayers, observations about the possessed child, notes on local customs. But by the third entry something had changed. December 13th, the girl spoke to me today but not in the Latin tongue as reported. She spoke in perfect Italian with the voice of my deceased mother. She knew things, personal things about my childhood, about sins I have never confessed to any living soul. When I asked her how she knew these things, she smiled with teeth too sharp for a child and said, "Because I was there, Alessandro. I've always been there." But that was only the beginning. As days passed, Lucia's behavior became more erratic, more impossible. She would disappear from her locked room, only to be found in the village cemetery, digging with her bare hands at specific graves. When confronted, she would have no memory of how she got there. Toretti began the formal exorcism on December 20th, following the ancient rites to the letter. But instead of weakening, the entity within the girl seemed to grow stronger. On the winter solstice, something happened that shattered Toretti's understanding of good and evil forever. The girl died. Not slowly, not dramatically. One moment she was writhing and screaming in Latin. The next she was perfectly still, her young heart stopped. Father Marcello pronounced her dead. The family wept. And Toretti felt the weight of failure crushing his faith. But 3 hours later, as the village prepared for her funeral, Lucia opened her eyes and sat up on her deathbed. She was changed, calm, coherent, speaking normally. The possession appeared to be over. The villagers celebrated. Toretti was hailed as a miracle worker. Letters of congratulation poured in from Rome. But Toretti knew something was terribly wrong. The girl who had returned was not the same girl who had died. Toretti's journal entry from December 24th, Christmas Eve, reveals the first horrifying clue. Lucia asked me today about Father DeMarco, the priest who came before me. She described him perfectly. His slight limp, his nervous habit of touching his crucifix, the birthmark on his left hand. When I told her that Father DeMarco had died in Rome 2 years ago, she laughed. "Oh no, Father Alessandro," she said. "He's not dead. None of them are dead. They're all here with me now. Would you like to meet them?" That night, Toretti followed Lucia into the woods beyond the village. What he found there would haunt him for the rest of his life. A clearing. 7 graves freshly dug. 7 wooden crosses, bearing 7 familiar names. The names of the priests who had come before him to perform exorcisms in Castel di Sang. And standing beside each grave, solid as flesh and blood, were the 7 dead priests themselves. But they were not ghosts. They were not spirits. They were perfectly preserved, exactly as they had been in life, but their eyes held a terrible awareness. They spoke to Toretti, welcoming him to what they called the circle of understanding. Father DeMarco, the last priest to arrive before Toretti, stepped forward and spoke words that Toretti recorded verbatim. "You think you saved the girl, Brother Alessandro. You think your faith triumphed over evil. But you have it backwards. The girl was never possessed. She was the possessor. Lucia Benedetti is not a 12-year-old child. She is something far older, far more cunning. She has been playing this game for centuries in different bodies in different villages. And we are her collection, her priests, her servants." The truth hit Toretti like a physical blow. The entity had not been cast out of the girl, it had never been in the girl. The girl was the entity. And every priest who came to save her became trapped in her web, caught between life and death, forced to serve her will. But why? Toretti asked. What does she want? Father DeMarco's laugh was hollow, empty. She wants what she has always wanted, to corrupt the church from within. Every priest she claims becomes a doorway. Through us, she reaches into the Vatican itself, whispering heresies, planting seeds of doubt, turning the holy against the sacred. She is not the devil, Alessandro. She is something worse. She is the devil's daughter, and her goal is not to destroy the church, but to possess it completely. But here is where Toretti's account takes its first shocking turn. Because as Father DeMarco spoke these words, Toretti noticed something that chilled his blood. The other dead priests were not looking at him with sympathy or warning. They were looking at him with hunger. Toretti realized the terrible truth. This was not a revelation meant to save him. This was a recruitment. The dead priests had not been warning him about Lucia's true nature. They had been celebrating it. They were showing him what he would become. Another servant in her supernatural army. But Toretti was cleverer than they anticipated. As the 7 dead priests began to circle him, their forms becoming less human and more predatory, he did something none of his predecessors had thought to do. He began to pray not for salvation, not for protection, not for deliverance from evil. He began to pray for damnation. "If you are the devil's daughter," he cried out to Lucia, who had been watching from the shadows, "then I offer you something no priest has ever offered before. I offer you my soul willingly, completely, without reservation. But I offer it with a condition, that you allow me to document your true nature, to write the complete account of your deceptions, to create a record that will warn others of what you truly are." The forest fell silent. Even the dead priests stopped their approach. Lucia stepped into the moonlight, and for the first time Toretti saw her as she really was. Not a 12-year-old child, but something ancient and terrible wearing the mask of innocence. Her smile revealed teeth like broken glass, and her eyes held the darkness of centuries. "Clever priest," she whispered. "You offer me your soul, but you seek to buy something with it. Very well. I accept your bargain. Write your account. Document my methods. But know this, when you are finished, your soul will join my collection. And your words will never be believed. They will be dismissed as the ravings of a madman, buried in archives where no one will ever read them." And so began the most terrifying collaboration in church history. A priest and a demon, working together to document the corruption of faith itself. For the next 3 months, Toretti lived in a state between salvation and damnation. By day, he performed his duties as the village priest, tending to his flock, conducting masses, hearing confessions. But by night, he met with Lucia in the ancient catacombs beneath Castel di Sang. where she revealed to him the true scope of her centuries-long campaign against the Church. She showed him documents, authentic Vatican correspondence dating back 400 years, proving that she had infiltrated dozens of religious communities across Europe. Every major scandal, every corruption, every crisis of faith that had rocked the Catholic Church could be traced back to one of her priests, men who had made the same bargain Toretti was making now. She revealed how she had influenced the selection of certain cardinals, how she had whispered doubts into the ears of bishops during crucial decisions, how she had planted evidence of impropriety that destroyed the reputations of truly faithful men while elevating the corrupt to positions of power. "The beauty of my work," she explained during one of their midnight sessions, "is that I never force anyone to sin. I simply arrange circumstances so that sin becomes the easier choice. A cardinal's gambling debts paid by a mysterious benefactor. A bishop's indiscretions covered up in exchange for a single vote. A pope's illness that brings my chosen successor to power. I am not the corruption, I am merely the gardener who helps it grow." Toretti documented every revelation, every confession, every proof of her influence. His journal became a catalog of the Church's darkest secrets, many of which would not become public knowledge for another century. But as the weeks passed, Toretti began to notice changes in himself. His prayers felt hollow. His faith, once unshakable, began to crack. Most disturbing of all, he found himself agreeing with some of Lucia's criticisms of the Church. She was corrupting him slowly and subtly, just as she had corrupted others before him. The very act of documenting her evil was making him complicit in it. But here, my friends, is where Toretti's account reveals something that even I, in all my years of studying forbidden texts, did not expect. Because on March 15, 1888, as Toretti prepared to complete his final entry and surrender his soul as promised, he made a discovery that changed everything. In the deepest part of the catacombs, where Lucia had led him to show him the remains of her previous victims, Toretti found something she had not intended him to see: the burial chamber of the real Lucia Benedetti. The real 12-year-old girl who had died of plague in 1623, more than 2 centuries before Toretti's arrival. The entity he had been dealing with was not Lucia at all. It was something that had taken her name, her appearance, her identity. And according to the burial inscriptions, this same entity had been operating under different names in different forms for over 1,000 years. But that was not the most shocking discovery. The most shocking discovery was what Toretti found carved into the stone above the real Lucia's tomb. A symbol, a seal, a mark that he recognized from his years of theological study. It was not the mark of a demon. It was the mark of an angel. A fallen angel, cast down not for rebellion against God, but for something far worse, for trying to save humanity by exposing the corruption within God's chosen representatives on earth. The entity that called itself Lucia had not been sent by Satan to destroy the Church. She had been sent by God himself to purify it. Toretti's final entries reveal a truth so disturbing that it challenges the very foundations of faith itself. According to the angelic entity, God had grown disgusted with the corruption that had infested his Church. The greed, the politics, the abuse of power, the protection of sinners while persecuting the innocent. Traditional methods of reform had failed. Prophets were ignored. Saints were martyred. Miracles were dismissed or exploited for profit. So God had decided to use a different approach, to allow his Church to corrupt itself so thoroughly that faithful believers would be forced to choose between the institution and the faith it claimed to represent. The entity Toretti knew as Lucia was not a demon recruiting servants for hell. She was an angel gathering evidence for heaven, documenting every sin, every cover-up, every betrayal of trust so that when the final judgment came, there would be no denying the extent of the Church's fall from grace. The 7 dead priests were not her victims. They were her witnesses. Men who had agreed to abandon their earthly lives to serve a higher purpose. The complete exposure of institutional corruption. But here lies the ultimate horror of Toretti's discovery. If this entity was truly an agent of God, then every sin she had exposed was real. Every corruption she had documented was genuine. Every scandal she had revealed was authentic. She had not corrupted the Church. She had simply illuminated the corruption that was already there. But Toretti's journal reveals one final twist that even I struggle to comprehend. On his last night in Castel di Sang, as he prepared to complete his manuscript and join the ranks of the divine witnesses, Toretti discovered something that shattered even this terrible revelation. In the entity's private chambers, hidden behind layers of angelic script and divine seals, he found a collection of documents that revealed the ultimate truth. The entity was not an angel sent by God to expose corruption. She was not a demon sent by Satan to create corruption. She was something else entirely. She was a test. A test created jointly by heaven and hell to see which side humanity would choose when faced with absolute knowledge of good and evil, right and wrong, faith and doubt. Every priest who had come to Castel D. Sang had been offered the same choice Toretti faced: to remain in ignorant faith, or to gain terrible knowledge at the cost of their innocence. Some chose faith and were allowed to leave their memories wiped clean. Others chose knowledge and became witnesses to truths too dangerous for the world to know. But Toretti chose something different. He chose to break the test itself. On the night of March 20, 1888, instead of completing his manuscript and accepting his fate, Toretti did something unprecedented. He burned every page he had written. He destroyed every piece of evidence the entity had shown him. He shattered every artifact, every document, every proof of the centuries-long conspiracy. And then he walked away. Not to heaven, not to hell, not to damnation or salvation, just away. The entity that called herself Lucia tried to stop him. She reminded him of their bargain, of the contract he had made with his soul as collateral. But Toretti had found a loophole that neither heaven nor hell had anticipated. He had offered his soul in exchange for the right to document the truth. But if there was no truth to document, if everything he had learned was merely part of a cosmic experiment rather than genuine revelation, then their contract was void. The entity raged. The 7 witness priests pleaded. The very foundations of Castel D. Sang shook with supernatural fury. But Toretti walked through the village gates and never looked back. He returned to Rome with a story of a successful exorcism. The possessed girl had been cleansed, he reported. The demon cast out. The village saved. The Vatican celebrated his victory. But Toretti knew the truth. He had not defeated evil or served good. He had simply chosen to remove himself from a game in which victory itself was meaningless. Toretti lived for 37 more years after his experience in Castel D. Sang. He served faithfully as a priest, never speaking publicly of what he had witnessed. But in private he began writing again. Not about angels or demons or cosmic tests. About humanity. About the dangerous seduction of absolute answers in a universe that might be fundamentally ambiguous. About the temptation to believe that we can know with certainty the difference between good and evil, right and wrong, sacred and profane. His final manuscript, completed shortly before his death in 1925, contains a warning that resonates even today. I have stared into the face of ultimate truth and found it to be a mirror. What I saw there was not God or Satan, not angel or demon, but the reflection of my own desperate need to believe that someone, somewhere, knows what all of this means. The greatest evil is not corruption or temptation or even damnation. The greatest evil is the certainty that we are right when we cannot possibly know if we are right. The greatest good is not faith or works or salvation. The greatest good is the humility to act with compassion despite our ignorance. But here is what troubles me most about Toretti's account, what keeps me awake in the darkest hours of the night. What if he was wrong? What if the entity in Castel D. Sang was exactly what she claimed to be, an agent of divine justice documenting genuine corruption? What if Toretti's escape was not a victory over cosmic manipulation, but a betrayal of divine purpose? What if, by destroying the evidence and walking away, he allowed real evil to continue unopposed? Because I have researched every detail of Toretti's account. I have visited the ruins of Castel D. Sang, now abandoned for over a century. I have traced the histories of every priest mentioned in his journal. And I have discovered something that Toretti never knew, something that would have shattered even his hard-won peace of mind. 3 of the 7 priests Toretti met in that midnight forest are still alive today. Not as ancient men, but exactly as they were in 1887. Father DeMarco was spotted in 1923 at a seminary in Bavaria, unchanged by 36 years. Father Molinari was photographed in 1951 at a Vatican conclave, looking precisely as Toretti described him. Father Sant'Angelo was identified in church records from 1978, performing baptisms in Sicily with the same face, the same mannerisms, the same apparent age as when Toretti met him among the graves. They are still out there, still serving whatever purpose they agreed to serve in that cursed village. And if Toretti's account is accurate, they are not alone. They are part of a network that spans centuries, includes hundreds of individuals, and reaches into the highest levels of church hierarchy. The question that haunts me is this: were they trying to expose corruption, or create it? Were they gathering evidence of sin, or planting seeds of sin? Were they serving heaven's justice, or hell's vengeance? And most terrifying of all, if they approached me, if they offered me the same choice they offered Toretti, would I have the strength to walk away? Or would I, like so many others, choose knowledge over innocence, certainty over faith, truth over peace? I found Toretti's manuscript in 1989, hidden in a collection of documents being transferred from the old Vatican library to the new archives. It was misfiled under fiction and folklore. Whether by accident or design, I may never know. For 35 years, I have carried the burden of his words, wondering if they represent truth or delusion, divine revelation or demonic deception. But recently, I have begun to notice things. Small things. Patterns. Certain church officials making decisions that seem influenced by voices they won't acknowledge. Scandals breaking at precisely the moments when they will cause maximum damage to institutional credibility. Reform movements failing in ways that seem almost orchestrated. Young priests disappearing for weeks at a time, returning with changed perspectives and hollow eyes. I think they are still out there. The witnesses. The collectors. The servants of whatever force operates beyond our understanding of good and evil. And I think they may be closer to achieving their ultimate goal than Toretti ever imagined. The question is, when they come for me, and they will come for me because I have read their secrets and shared their story, will I make the same choice Toretti made? Will I choose the uncertainty of ignorance over the terrible burden of knowledge? Will I walk away from answers that might destroy my faith, but might also save my soul? I don't know. God help me, I don't know. And so, my friends, I leave you with the same choice that faced Father Alessandro Toretti in that cursed village so many years ago. You have heard his account. You have learned of forces that operate beyond our comprehension, of conspiracies that span centuries, of tests that challenge the very foundation of faith itself. What will you do with this knowledge? Will you dismiss it as fantasy, returning to the comfortable certainty of your beliefs? Will you investigate further, seeking evidence that might prove or disprove these claims? Or will you, like Toretti, choose to walk away from answers that might be too terrible to bear? But beware. Once you begin looking for the patterns Toretti described, you may find them everywhere. Once you start questioning the official stories, you may discover that truth and falsehood are more intertwined than you ever imagined. And once you attract the attention of those who guard these secrets, you may find yourself faced with the same impossible choice that has confronted every seeker of forbidden knowledge since the beginning of time. The choice between faith and knowledge. Between peace and truth, between salvation and understanding. Choose wisely, my friends. Choose wisely. If you found yourself captivated by this dark mystery, subscribe now to the channel for more secrets that Father Graves dares to reveal from the Vatican's forbidden depths. Comment below, what is the most terrifying secret you believe the Vatican still guards? Share your theory so we can investigate it in our next video. Remember, some doors once opened can never be closed again. Some knowledge once gained can never be forgotten, and some choices once made echo through eternity itself. Until we meet again in the shadows of sacred mysteries, this is Father Graves, keeper of secrets that the world was never meant to know.